Hey guys, I'm here today to talk to you about a new math skill that's called factoring. So we've been working our way through this algebraic expressions unit. We worked through some vocab, we identified like terms, we combined them. Last week we worked on the distributive property where we were handing out or distributing the number or term on the outside of the parentheses. So for example, if you look at this one here, it says 2 parentheses 5n plus 8. Well, we learned to distribute. And if we distribute the 2, right, this means 2 times 5n. So we would have gotten 10n. And then plus, if we take the 2 times the other term in the parentheses, which is 18, 16. So we focused last week on distributing. Well, today we're going to start it off by sort of doing the opposite. If you look, when I distributed this, I got 10n plus 16. I'm starting with 10n plus 16 now, and I want to turn it into a factored expression, which will look like this, where we have a number on the outside of the parentheses and some terms inside. Okay, so we're going to sort of do the reversal today. And we do that by finding the biggest term, or biggest number, I guess I should say, sorry, that can go into both 10 and 16. Finding something they have in common. Well, yes, they have one in common, but that's not the biggest one. I see they're even, so they have 2 in common, right? And I think that's the biggest one. So 2 would go on the outside of my parenthesis. Okay, I'm going to make my parentheses. And then if I divide 10 by 2, we're dividing, right? Because before we were multiplying. So the opposite is dividing. So if I divide by 2, I get 5. And I bring the n down, right? And now I divide positive 16 by 2. So if I do that, I get a positive 8. And if you look, this matches where we started. So we did the reverse here in factoring this expression. Okay, let's look at another one. Okay, so this one says 12d minus 15. So our goal is to pull out the biggest factor possible. Okay, so if I look at this, I know they both have 1 in common, right? But that wouldn't change anything. So I think the biggest thing that 12 and 15 share is a 3, right? They both could be divided by 3. So I'm going to make my parentheses. I'm going to put a 3 on the outside. 12 divided by 3 is 4. I'm going to bring the d down. And remember, that was a positive divided by a positive, so that's a positive 4. And now I have negative 15. And those of you that like can do the leave change opposite. You can always do that. It will never do you wrong. But so negative 15 divided by 3 is going to be negative 5. And if I look at my answer, 4 and 5, there's no other factor. So if you miss something along the way, you could factor this more than once if you needed to. Okay, but that is our biggest factor, 3, that they both have in common. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so this one says 24 plus 30s. So thinking about what they have in common, and again, you can make a list of all the ways, if it helps you, list all the ways to make 24, right? 1 times 24. You could do 2 times 12. You can do 3 times 8. You could do 6 and 4. And I think I've hit them all. Then I could do the same with 30. 1 and 30. 2 and 15. 3 and 10. 6 and 5. And I think I've hit those also. And find the largest one they have in common. Okay, if we're looking for the largest one, I think 6 would be it. So if you're struggling to find the largest common denominator, this listing might help you a little bit. Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to make my parentheses, and I've decided that 6 is the largest one. So if I put 6 on the outside, 24 divided by 6 is 4, right? And 30s, it's a positive, divided by 6 is going to give me 5. And don't forget your s. Bring the s along with you. And if I look at 4 and 5, nothing else goes into them. So we have factored out the largest number possible. Okay, guys, here's another one. And this one is slightly different than the rest. If you look, both of these terms are negative, right? If I do leave change opposite, both of these terms are negative. So we'll talk about that in a second, but keep that in mind. Looking at these, we need to find the biggest number possible that we can pull out. Okay, so I think the biggest one we can pull out is a 4. So I'm going to put that on the outside of my parentheses. Now, let's go back to the negative part. When both of your terms, or all of your terms, whether you have 3 or 4 terms here, when they're all negative, you can also pull a negative out. So I am pulling out a -4. Okay, because both are negative, I can do that. I could not do that in the previous problems because both of them were not negative. But this one it is. So now the problem, let me erase this for a second. So now my problem is -28 divided by -4. And a negative divided by a negative, right, is a positive. So I have a +7 here. And again, -32 divided by -4 gives me a +8, and I need to bring my variable along, k. If I expand this, 7 times 4, I get -28. -4 times 8, I get a -32. It still works. But you can only pull out a negative when all of your terms are negative, okay? If you would give me an answer without this negative being pulled out, this would not be correct. Would not be a completely factored expression. Okay, so you have to keep a lookout for that when all of your terms are negative. Okay, here's another expression for us to factor. So before we do anything, let's just take a glance at our data here. So this has a +30f, a -42w, and a +12. So we have different signs. They are not all negative. So in this problem, we cannot pull out a negative like we did previously. Okay? So that will not come into play here like we did on the last one. So now we need to find, if we look at our numbers, 30, 42, and 12, the biggest factor for all of them. The largest one that they share in common, and I think that would be 6. So I'm going to put a 6 on the outside here. Okay? So let's move on. 30f divided by 6. So if I divide, I get 5, and we bring down our variable. And remember, this was a positive divided by a positive. That's why we have a +5. In the next one, -42w is divided by 6. So a positive divided by a negative here is going to give us a -7w. And then lastly, a +12 divided by 6 is a +2. And as I look at my numbers here, 5, 7, and 2, nothing else goes into them, so I know I pulled out the largest one. Okay, so again, we could not pull out a negative here because everything was not negative. That did not work on this one. Okay, guys, let's look at one last one here. And in this problem, the first thing I notice is that I have a -40, a -24, and a -56. So all 3 of my terms are negative. So that means I am going to have to pull a negative out as I factor. Okay? So if we look at the numbers, 40, 24, and 56, we have to find the largest factor that goes into all of them. And I believe that would be 8. So I'm going to put my 8 here. But remember, we said that all of these were negative. So not only are we pulling out 8, but we're pulling out a negative 8. We're pulling out that negative. Okay, now I think we're ready to go to work. So negative 40 divided by negative 8 would be a positive 5, and I'm going to bring the t down. Look at the next one. Negative 24p divided by negative 8. So a negative divided by a negative is going to give me a positive, and that would be 3p. And then the last one, again, negative divided by negative is going to give me a positive 7. So this was one that we could pull out a negative because all of your terms were negative. Okay, and if we look at our numbers, 5, 3, and 7, nothing else goes into them. We have pulled out the biggest ones. Okay, so factoring is sort of the reverse of the distributive property, right? With the distributive property, we multiplied all of our terms by the number on the outside. In factoring, we're doing some division. So they're sort of opposites of each other. Okay? So I don't think this process is that difficult. The one thing I want you to keep a lookout for is when all of your terms are negative, you should be pulling out a negative. If they're not all negative, as in the previous problem we did, like this one, they're not all negative, you cannot pull out a negative. Okay? So you do have some practice on Schoology with this, guys. You may use your calculator if it helps you with some of the division. That's perfectly fine. If you need anything, message me. Okay. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.